Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you all. So wonderful to see everyone, seeing so many of my CLL friends, and I want to thank everybody who put this evening together. And when Annette asked me to do a presentation for this, which I was very happy to do, I thought of the theme of the video that you're going to be watching after the presentation, which is about, the art of aging well. And I thought about doing, since my background is in art history, and I was for a number of very happy years the regular art history instructor here at the CLL. I thought of doing artists' sort of late work. I'm calling this great artists in their prime. So there's a little bit of Miss Jean Brodie, as there is in so many of us, and talking about artists' work primarily after 60, and some quite a bit beyond that. And so I thought about, how to accentuate that, though, in a very positive way. We'll be looking at works of artists who sometimes face the challenges of aging, but nevertheless created great art, and all the sort of positive spirit that can come out of that. And so, in that vein, at first I thought of a phrase that might might be something to think about. And so I came up with this idea. My first thought was, um, whoops, don't know why it's not advancing. Oh, wait, let me try this. Let's see if this works. Oh, there we go. At first I thought, it's never too late to, and then I thought, no, I don't like that at all. So instead, I'm preferring it's always a good time to, for example, try a new artistic medium, something you haven't done before. Expand your style, change it, go in further directions with it. And as we'll see, a couple of artists who are able to, in their later years, just really take their art in directions that nobody had thought of because of their ability to command their techniques, or explore new subject matter. All of these things it's always a good time to do any of them. The first artist I want to mention is, as an example, is Tiziano Vecellio, the great Venetian Renaissance painter of the 16th century. And this is a self-portrait of Titian, who would have been about in his early 70s at this point. He was the kind of grand old man of painting, of Italian painting at this time of his life, and someone whose style had continually evolved throughout his career. When he was young, although he always had the Venetian artist's love of light and shadow, and this sort of uh, beautiful way of giving that sense of three-dimensionality on the two-dimensional surface, as in this early Sacred and Profane Love, from 1514, when he was a relatively young artist, this allegory. Incidentally, there's debate about which one is sacred and which one is profane. Although, because, just because nudity, you might think of as purely sensual, but it also means truth, the naked truth. But it's generally thought that the demure, white clad figure on the left is sacred love, and the sensuous nude on the right is profane love. But Titian's style, his painterliness, his way of softening the brushwork, and giving his paintings a more misty, atmospheric, evocative quality, carries on throughout his career and becomes increasingly more prominent. This painting of the mythological subject of Diana and Actaeon is one of a group of mythological paintings that Titian executed for the King of Spain, Philip II. And it's astonishing to think of the devoutly Catholic Philip II, a very austere man, having this fondness for these sensuous, and in this case dangerous, mythological subjects about a young huntsman who spies the goddess Diana and her nymphs bathing. And Diana's punishment for that is to turn Actaeon into a stag so that his own hounds basically kill him and eat him alive. But what is also, this is very Venetian in the sort of softness, the sensuality of it, the expansion of colors, the use of these sort of rosy pinks and oranges, and even a figure of African ethnicity over on the right, thanks to the expansion of technique of new colors coming into Western Europe, which pigments which were actually created out of arsenic. That's where you could get some really gorgeous oranges and browns, but unfortunately, it's toxic, and we'll see an artist deal with that in a different sort of way. But by Titian's late years, when he was in his 80s, he did the most extraordinary. There's a detail of this painting in the booklet, but his style has become so free, so evocative, so suggestive rather than detailed, and yet everything is true, everything is believable in it, and this incredibly powerful imagery that he creates in his later years as this pietà, lamentation over the body of Christ. And this is what I mean about an artist who's, yes, he had a workshop and he must have had assistance with a lot of his later works, but Titian is nevertheless so in command of his technique, so in command of his style that he can get this loose with the paint and still make it a very powerful work. Similar things happen with Rembrandt van Rijn. And one of the things that Rembrandt is characteristic of Rembrandt's work throughout his career, well, two things. One is he probably did more self-portraits than any other major artist that I can think of. And he's exploring himself in different moments of his life, different aspects of his personality, putting on different personae at different times of his career, at the same time as that his art, his style really sort of loosens up, and the rich painterliness of it, the drawing attention to the actual thick and rich application of the paint becomes even more prominent. On the left, a relatively, this is Rembrandt in his mid 30s, the very confident sort of Renaissance prince of the king of art in Amsterdam of his time, versus the painting on the self-portrait on the right, an older Rembrandt who's been through a lot, the loss of his first wife, the loss of his this is after his bankruptcy in 1656. His later years very sadly characterized by the loss of many of those nearest and dearest to him. And also just the sensitivity that Rembrandt brings not only to his own face, but even as even as a young artist, the way he represents older people. There's a great deal of sensitivity to it. This painting in the Art Institute, for example, the old man with a gold chain, many years ago we used to say it was a portrait of the artist's father, and we know that's not the case. But this is a model that Rembrandt used more than once in his early work. This is an example of what at the time was referred to as a tronie, which is a Dutch term for a kind of face study, a personality study. But Rembrandt here gives a great deal of dignity to the figure by adding these kind of accessories, this feathered hat and a little bit of armor around the neck and this gold chain with a medallion. Rembrandt used to hang around in flea markets and house sales to pick up a lot of these kinds of accessories cheaply that he could use in his paintings. The painting is a study of a variety of textures of fabric and metal, but also of a person, also of a human face. This is an older man who has experienced quite a bit, and is very often the case with Dutch paintings of older people, including the later self-portraits of Rembrandt. If you look at the mouth, the Dutch in the 17th century were the first kind of modern people to have a serious sugar addiction. Sugar was coming in from Brazil and the Canary Islands, and it was readily available. And of course, they didn't have modern dentistry. So you see a lot of sucked in mouths and things like that. And yet Rembrandt does this with, again, this incredible sensitivity. Whoops, sorry, I'm going backwards, not forwards. And you look at Rembrandt's very late work in his last decade in the 1660s. This is a wonderful example of it. This thick impasto, as we say, this application of the paint, the use of a palette knife, the texture, it's very difficult to see in a reproduction in a flat slide, but this kind of richness of it. But also his art gets less dramatic as he gets older, and it gets incredibly more subtle and more nuanced in terms of the emotional connections between the viewer and the figures have with each other. This painting, the so-called Jewish bride, as it's known by tradition, it may represent a biblical couple, and there's a debate about whether that's the case. Certainly, they're in sort of historic costume rather than contemporary dress. But the way in which, if I show you this detail, the beautiful, the hands touching each other in the most delicate way, even though they're not looking directly at each other, the way he has his hand on her breast. And there's a kind of intimacy here that we're being allowed a glimpse of. And without any fanfare of emotional effect, but with this, again, this lovely, gorgeous, rich paint, which unfortunately by the 1660s, in Rembrandt's late years, was extremely unfashionable in Holland, and they were going for a much glossier, a more high finish kind of painting with brighter colors. Rembrandt uses a deliberately restrained palette in a lot of his later art, really for aesthetic reasons. Rembrandt was well versed in the history of art. He read about the ancient Greek painter Apelles, who could do paintings with four colors, basically black, white, red, and yellow. And this is the effect that Rembrandt is going for. And I can't resist putting up not only one of Rembrandt's great later paintings, but I think one of the most moving works of art in the history of art, The Return of the Prodigal Son, this parable told by Jesus about the son who wastes his inheritance, is devastated by famine and is welcomed home and forgiven by his father, which you see happening at the left. And this figure, like a plague victim, but it's hard not as a person in our time to look at this and see the atrocities of more recent times, this shaved head, and just the most beautiful, subtle sense of forgiveness and love and this loving embrace. Now, as I mentioned, some artists start experimenting with new techniques, sometimes out of interest and sometimes out of, you might say, necessity. And this is certainly the case with Jean-Simeon Chardin, who had spent much of his career in 18th century France doing paintings, sort of, you might say, two basic types of subject matter. One is sort of humble genre paintings like this, scenes of everyday life, like this saying grace, a mother in a humble interior with two small children, teaching the younger child, with help from her older sister sitting on the higher chair, to put her hands together and pray and say grace. Chardin was very celebrated for his very thoughtful, very sensitive, very respectful treatment of the lower middle class and working class people of his time. And he is also celebrated for his other great kind of subject matter, which are these still life paintings, mostly very humble objects, not gorgeous, luxurious things or exotic fruits or anything like that, but simply sort of humble kitchen utensils and simple food. Again, done in a very deliberately limited palette, a very understated kind of palette. Towards the end of his life, though, there's a self-portrait by Chardin in the booklet, but towards the end of his life, Chardin started doing pastels. Mostly, he did a couple of self-portraits. Here he is with glasses to help him see better, of course, a visor which you wear to keep the glare of light out so that you can work, and this sort of turban over his head to keep any paint from getting into his hair or any hair getting onto the canvas, or in this case, the paper that this pastel is on. The reason for Chardin moving into pastel was that by the 1770s, he was starting to get sick from working with the paints. And this is because of the high toxicity level of a lot of the paints that were very commonplace at the time. I mentioned arsenic to create uh, oranges and golds and browns, but also reds from vermilion, which is basically mercury, and of course the very commonplace lead white. There was just a vague understanding of how dangerous these were at the time. And so Chardin starts to move it into a pastel medium. He was not the introducer of pastel into 18th century art, sort of pure pastel. That was the Italian woman artist Rosalba Carriera earlier on in the 18th century. But Chardin takes it up, and the Art Institute of Chicago is very fortunate to have this pair, even though they're currently off view, of Chardin and his wife executed at just about the same time. And again, I love the portrait. I love his self-portrait, but I also love the portrait of his wife. These are, two people who have spent so many years together, know each other so intimately, and it really conveys so beautifully via the intimacy of the pastel medium. Now, in terms of artists aging and encountering some of the challenges of aging and being able to work around those and work with them, even, I think of two of the prominent French Impressionists jumping into the 19th century. One is Claude Monet, the other Pierre-Auguste Renoir. And of course, as young artists, they were part of this burgeoning Impressionist movement in the 1860s, which got its name at their first exhibition as a group in 1874. And it was not intended, the word Impressionist was not intended as a compliment. It was supposed to be an insult for that these paintings are just sort of impressions rather than fully finished works of art. But they were, young and rebellious and challenging the artistic authority and tradition of their time. So this is an early Monet, and of course one of Renoir's early works, La Grenouillère, with this very delicate um, brushwork, this feathery brushwork, as people often describe it, so evocative, so able to capture water and light and all those sort of ephemeral effects. This subject matter, too, going outside the city of Paris and going to these places where Parisians were going to relax and enjoy the lovely weather on a nice day. This became an important Impressionist subject, which then kind of continues. And the last Impressionist exhibition in Paris in 1886, there was this painting, which is now one of the great treasures of the Art Institute that does not travel. So if you want to see it, you have to come to the Art Institute to see it. Georges Seurat's painting A Sunday on La Grande Jatte, 1884, actually done between 1884 and 1886. The inclusion of this painting and other pointillist pictures like it in the 1886 exhibition, this was the 8th and last Impressionist exhibition, the inclusion of these pointillist pictures inspired Monet, Renoir, and also Alfred Sisley to boycott that 1886 exhibition because they said this is not Impressionism, and it isn't. There's the same kind of experimentation with light and color. There's the same kind of subject matter, Parisians getting away from the city and enjoying a hot day, breezes off the river on a hot day. What this painting and others like it did, though, was to inspire the Impressionists to sort of move away from the early phases of Impressionism, that sort of moment in time that you see right in front of you, that capturing of modern life. Seurat's goal was to sort of create something more timeless, something more museum worthy, something on a grand scale, something that had echoes of earlier art. And so this inspired the surviving impressionists and a lot of their later work to start working in in ways that were more timeless but in different ways. For Renoir, it was a tightening of his brushwork, giving it a more sort of classical appearance, a sort of Greek Roman inspired, Renaissance inspired appearance, while also paying homage to French tradition, to artists like the great French neoclassical painter of the 19th century, Ingres, but even before then to the 18th century Rococo painters with their sort of delightful love of sensuality and even frivolity, just the sort of pleasures of art. And so the great bathers here, in which Renoir used a couple of models, including his wife Aline and the model and artist Suzanne Valadon as models to create this the idyllic image that again is removes elements of contemporary fashion or contemporary life and creates this kind of beautiful paradise image. Um, what became challenging, as I'm sure a lot of you know about Renoir in his late years, was that it became increasingly a challenging life of dealing with arthritis, which became increasingly bad to the extent that by the time he executed this painting in 1914, he had to have his hand sort of strapped into a particular, his arm sort of strapped into a particular way to be able to hold the brush. He had to sort of strap the brush to his hand. Eventually, and there are actual surviving film footage of this, Renoir had the brush in his teeth so that he could work because his hands became impossible to work with, extremely painful and difficult. And that perseverance, that desire, that sense of mission, that sense of I must create art no matter what is happening is, I think, it sounds sad, but I find it very inspiring. This is a portrait of an actress named Tila Durieux. This was her stage name. She was German, not French. She and her husband were in Paris, though, in 1914 because she was, and this is the costume that she's wearing here. She played Eliza Doolittle in George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, which was the play that, in translation, of course, that was taking Europe by storm. But this again, this kind of the monumentality of the figure, this kind of the sort of drapery in the back. This recalls Renaissance portraiture, with Renoir also loosening up the technique enough to stay true, in a sense, to his impressionist roots. Monet goes in sort of similar with similar ideas, but it just looks different. And of course, Renoir had always been more interested in the human figure. Monet had always been more interested in the landscape, in nature. And famously, Monet's response to Seurat and this move towards a more timeless art was to uh, how to reconcile the impressionist love of light and color and atmosphere with this goal to create something more timeless, more museum worthy, in a sense, on a grander scale. And he does two things basically. One is these series of paintings of the same view, the same subject over and over again as the light changes and the weather changes and the atmosphere changes and the seasons change. But the other is even more, I think, even more poignantly and powerfully, is to create the natural world, the atmosphere that he then paints. And so famously at his house at Giverny, sort of between Paris and Normandy, which is where Monet grew up, and he creates this garden. He had 4 acres of garden at Giverny. This is his view of the house and a lot of the sort of flower gardens. But even more famously, Monet rerouted a branch of the river Epte, which was itself a tributary of the river Seine, and he had this rerouted to feed a water garden, an almost 1 acre water garden. And the water garden looks very much today as Monet intended it, I should say that Monet's neighbors were not very happy about this. They had traditionally watered their horses at this branch of the river. So, just to point out, Monet going from being the scrappy, young, rebellious artist to being, the obnoxious, famous neighbor who's, it's like move the river for me because I want a water pond. I feel bad for the neighbors, but on the other hand, we've got a lot of great paintings to show for this because this water garden became Monet's obsession and major inspiration in his later years. And it's so fascinating to watch his art evolve through these different phases. From and you can do it just at the Art Institute of Chicago alone. As the next few examples that I'll show you, the water lily pond itself from 1900 with the Japanese bridge. This was, kind of holdover of the Japonism, the fascination that Europeans had for Japanese art and culture and aesthetics of this period. But increasingly, Monet becomes more immersed visually in the water lily pond itself with these water lilies. The interesting thing here is that well, several interesting things. One is that he very much wanted water lilies. He loved the fact that they float on water, that they close up at night and open up during the day. So the sun, which was sun and water, were two of Monet's biggest obsessions, and to be able to experience these flowers that open up to the sun was very moving to him. It also the water lilies are very, on the one hand, very ancient flowers. They're sort of related to lotuses, so they have a sort of ancient, poetic and spiritual connotations. But these varieties that you see here with these pink and yellow flowers are really relatively new. They were invented by a French botanist in the years around 1880. And they also seem to probably appeal to Monet at this particular time because as I'm sure some of you know, Monet experienced cataracts for some parts of his later years. He there's you see a lot more for a number of years. You see a lot more warm colors, reds, oranges, pinks, yellows, because he complained about everything looking too bluish, and he was trying to overcompensate. There seems to have been some perhaps cyanopia, this giving a bluish cast to everything. And so, for example, in this from 1917 to 19, again, you see these pink and yellow and sort of purplish varieties. This is very much the palette that Monet was using. There's a lot of these warmer colors to sort of overcompensate for blue. And then I also love, but the other thing that happens, which is again, like Titian, like Rembrandt, what Monet is doing with his style goes beyond just the cataracts. It's not that things get blurrier because he's got cataracts. He's an artist who, like those earlier artists, is is so in command of his technique that he can do anything and yet still make it work. I love the area in the lower right corner of this painting. Still can't figure out if that's meant to be something or if he's just cleaning his brushes or just experimenting. It's this beautiful little abstract passage. And then in 1923, Monet finally underwent cataract surgery, which was successful. But I don't know I don't want to think about how they did it in the days before lasers. But you start to see a return of those evocative blues very gradually in his work.
All of the
Monet
pictures.
died in
Are
1926.
you
He had
looking at any of the
created this
photos?
enormous
I can't
suite
see any of them.
of
And the whole picture without any
nymphaeas, of water
photographs.
lilies that are now the Orangerie in Paris. Chicago's very own Martin Ryerson, one of our great early donors, collectors at the Art Institute, visited Monet and Giverny and wanted to acquire these great, enormous water lily paintings for the Art Institute, but the board of trustees thought the price was too high. We think Monet was deliberately overpricing it just to keep it in Paris. And you can see even in this photograph those beautiful blues and indigos sort of glowing out from these canvases. The other thing that I find very moving in this connection is that when Monet died in 1926, he had six gardeners at one time. He employed six full-time gardeners at Giverny, and those six gardeners were the pallbearers at his funeral. Now, the we move on into the 20th century, and we're actually going to be looking at a group of a number of women artists finally. And I begin with Georgia O'Keeffe, in part because, yes, there is a Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition at the Art Institute right now, My New Yorks, which runs until September 22nd. And I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it, in part because it gives, some artists, we find it difficult to think of them as older. With O'Keeffe, I think people often find it difficult to see her as younger. We sort of think of her as this, powerful kind of high priestess of art and nature. On the left, this photograph of relatively young O'Keeffe by her husband, Alfred Stieglitz. But this Sheldon with sunspots, which is currently in the O'Keeffe exhibition, the Sheldon Hotel, which is where O'Keeffe and Stieglitz lived in New York throughout the 1920s. And what's great about this exhibition is it reminds us that not only was O'Keeffe young once, but she also had this whole fascinating, more than almost 20 years of living in New York, rather than living in this before she really moved to the Southwest. And she talks about this skyscraper that at the time the Sheldon was the tallest skyscraper in Manhattan. And she talks about going out to see it one day and seeing the sun reflected on it, like as if somebody had taken a bite out of the building, which she thought was incredibly beautiful. And that's what she tries to capture here. It wasn't until the late 20s, really 1929, 30, that O'Keeffe even started going to the Southwest and, of course, eventually settled there. This photograph by Carl van Vechten, which was taken of her in 1950 at Abiquiu, which some of you may have visited in New Mexico. And the O'Keeffe also both explores new subject matter in her later years, but also is grappling with some challenges. And I really want to particularly highlight this whole series of paintings that she did in the 1960s of sort of the sky, often referred to generally as the Sky Above Cloud series. And this is, O'Keeffe was flying a lot during this time, and she was exhilarated by this feeling of being above the clouds, looking out the window of an airplane, being above the clouds and seeing sort of a second horizon above the horizon that we all think of as the horizon. And so she abstracts it, and you have these incredibly um, beautiful, ethereal, magnificent, magical paintings of these fluffy white clouds floating over through this kind of dreamy spiritual blue with the sort of pinks and pale blues of this other horizon along the way. The paintings become increasingly more abstract, like this one. This is number 2 from the series. And then the Art Institute has this one, Sky Over Clouds 4 from 1965, which is enormous. And if you've seen it, you know how big it is. And it is also in the completely illogical place in the Art Institute in terms of art history, because you come off a series of galleries of Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and then you all of a sudden there's this enormous O'Keeffe in the stairwell to head down on the other side. And the reason for that is, of course, it's the only place in the Art Institute where the painting fits. It's 8 feet tall by 24 feet wide. And it really gives you the sense of being, like you could walk into this painting. And the clouds have gotten less fluffy. They've gotten more just sort of abstracted, but so you have this feeling of sort of paving stones into this mystical world that you can enter. Unfortunately, by the 1960s, O'Keeffe's eyesight was failing. She was diagnosed with macular degeneration, and it was becoming increasingly challenging for her to work. And so continuing the series, but making it in a sense more moving, even more abstracted and more moving. She does works like The Beyond from 1972, which is the same sort of idea, but it has a much more kind of mystical uh, quality of sort of moving on and moving, sort of dreaming of the beyond, but also preparing for it. It's just a very, very beautiful work. Another artist I want to highlight is Elizabeth Catlett. Catlett, again, her career was, as you can see, she lived quite a long and really fascinating and fulfilling life. She it, it did a lot of work beginning in her youth. She did sculpture. She did a lot of works on paper, a lot of prints. Eventually, Catlett settled in Mexico in the 1940s rather than working in the U.S. Like a lot of African Americans, Catlett found a more welcoming atmosphere in other countries than within the very segregated U.S. And she became part of a movement or of a kind of an organization, you could say, the Taller de Gráfica Popular, which was designed to produce modernist, sophisticated, but also easily available and affordable works of prints on like lino cuts. This is, in other words, made from a piece of linoleum, which has been incised into and then inked. And these were used that would be sort of creating modernist art for the masses. And this is a work from the I'm the Black Woman series on the right called In Other Folks' Homes, celebrating the work that so many women, and particularly Black women, women of color, have done in the history of the United States and elsewhere of cleaning other people's houses, caring for other people's children, and so on. Catlett really knows how to turn these figures into powerful, heroic figures. This is an example, and this is one of the things about her work that I find fascinating, is that she started designing a lot of these prints in the 40s and 50s and then reprinted them in the 1970s and later. This is sharecropper with this woman with a straw hat, looking up from her work, which the straw hat creating this kind of really wonderful sort of lopsided halo around her. She has a safety pin holding her clothes together. And then you might think, oh, how sad, she can't afford buttons. But actually, what this immortalizes is the fact that the older women in many Black communities were the keepers of the medicines and the keepers of the things that they made in order to bring people comfort or heal people. And so these were often kept in little bags, little sachets that you kept pinned to the inside of your garments so that they could be used if necessary. So rather than being a figure of pathos, this is a figure of power. But in terms of creating art much later on in her life, oops, the date is wrong. It's 1978, not 1798. Sorry. This is a sculpture and Catlett, had done sculpture in her life before. This is probably on a grander scale than she'd ever worked before. It's 14 feet tall, is this sculpture in bronze, called Students Aspire, which is at Howard University, one of the HBCUs, one of the historically Black universities. And I want to just have you see, and I can read. I know a lot of people don't like it when you read words that are on the screen, but I would like to. Catlett's own statement about what she was trying to do. She said, the two students are holding each other up to express unity rather than the competition that exists in education. The equal sign signifies scientific as well as social equality, that everyone should be equal, men to women, students to faculty, Blacks to everyone else. The students form the trunk of a tree. The medallions are arranged in a triangle like branches, and the plaque represents the roots. I was happy to have the suggestions of the faculty and students. I listened to what they had in mind, and then I incorporated that in my own way, end quote. And this is so typical of Catlett. She is open. She wants to hear from people. What do you need? What do you want me to do? But I'm going to do it in my own way. I'm going to absorb that and work with it. And I well remember in the Art Institute had an exhibition of Catlett's work towards the end of her very long life in 2005-06. And she was sort of dividing time between New York and Mexico at that time stage of her life. So in her 90s, she was still sort of commuting between New York and Mexico. And she came to Chicago for the exhibition. And if I remember correctly, it was her stipulation that Catlett's stipulation that when during her stay in Chicago, she wanted to make sure she met with students, art students from the School of the Art Institute to advise them, talk to them, listen to them, see what they were working on. And it was a very, very exciting moment. Unfortunately, I wasn't there, but I heard that it was fantastic. And that's so typical of what we know of Elizabeth Catlett. And I find too, it's one of the things that as you age, keeping in touch with young people, I think, is a very good thing to keep you, positive about the future. And then I want to conclude with a couple of sculptors, women sculptors, who both worked well into their later years, and again, very long lives. One is Louise Nevelson, and I love the photograph of her on the left by Jack Mitchell, which is from 1983, so she would have been, say, 84 at this point. She, with that very distinctive look, I mean, she always had the eyelashes and the headscarf and just this very determined to be and to create this kind of striking presence. But these beautiful abstract sculptures that she did, of course, as her career went on, and this is very typical of sculptors, regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of time period, is that you need help, you need a workshop, you need people to do a lot of the work for you. So something really finally completed in the last year of her life in 1988, Sky Landscape in Aluminum, which is, of course, she didn't do her own welding and so on. You can see the scale of this work, but it is her design, it is her concept. She is in charge of every single aspect of it. Also, an important aspect of artistic creation. We need to sort of get over the fact that this sort of myth of the lone artist, in an attic creating things. It's always almost always a collaboration, even if no one else is putting a hand to it. You, like Elizabeth Catlett implies, you live in the world that you live in, and you take into account what it is that people want, and you turn that into work done in your own way. And then finally, it's Louise Bourgeois, not Louis Bourgeois. Sorry. The spell check can only get you so far. I apologize. So Louise Bourgeois also lived to be almost 100 and was still creating work even in her later years. Again, she looks like the wisest, most powerful figure, and also I would say incredibly beautiful in her 90s, mid 90s, as she appears in the photograph. But it's Louis again. Sorry. Um, but in the 1990s, now again, she's not doing all of this herself. She's designing, she's conceiving, she's supervising. But she did these huge sculptures of spiders. And this one is called Maman, which, mommy. What this is, it's important to understand what Bourgeois is doing here is her own mother, Louise Bourgeois' mother, was a uh, was a weaver and someone who worked on the restoration of tapestries. So for Bourgeois, she always saw her mother and she saw spiders as beautiful, productive, nurturing creatures. She does not see them as creepy or dangerous. She sees them as as elegant and as weaving as her mother did. And also she sees, the idea that female spiders, lay their eggs and protect them very vigorously against anyone, as a mother should protect her children. So she sees this as this kind of all-encompassing figure, and yet you can still see beyond it. You can see through it. You have freedom to come out from under it, as children should be expected to do. And finally, we get Louise Bourgeois with an actual E on the end. Louise, and this done in the last year of her life, 2010, a digital print. So she's working with modern technology, and again, trying a new technique. And I think this is an important lesson to any of us who, as we get older, especially nowadays, who have a temptation to say, I can't get all this new technology. It's scary and I can't do it. It's like if Louise Bourgeois can figure out how to do a digital print, anybody can do anything, regardless of any age. This is a work that she did, which is called I Do, from 2010. As you can see, it's labeled as such, I Do. And it is a very stylized, abstracted flowers on the same stem, joined together in the same stem. This was Bourgeois, towards the end of her life, making a statement in support of marriage equality. Louise Bourgeois was a heterosexual woman, but she had long been a staunch ally of the LGBTQ community. And so this is her statement of support for marriage equality. And I love it. It's simple and moving without being sentimental. But the idea of, if two people love each other and say I do, it doesn't matter who they are, they join together in this way. And so I conclude with this image just because it's so beautiful and it's so moving, but also because to again, I do, any couple who exchanges vows and says I do is embarking on a journey together, and willingly and joyfully doing that. And that is, I think, the message of all of these artists, is that as we age, to keep being creative, to always look beyond, expand horizons, expand your consciousness of the world, try something new. It's always a good time to do that. So thank you very much.